The Tzeentch battle strategy revolves around making full use of magic to carry your battles whilst picking off what enemies remain with the rest of your troops. They come with a selection of powerful ranged units alongside a fairly weak front line, and some pretty tasty monsters that add up to a high damage but low durability army. Let's first go over the pros and cons of the Tzeentch battle gameplay. First of all, the pros: all units in the roster come with a barrier that provides them with an initial bit of protection in the form of a regenerating health bar. This can protect you from initial damage in battles and be used multiple times if you give units time to regenerate during your battle. You have many units that can utilize magic, such as lords, heroes, and some monsters. When you combine this with the Winds of Magic manipulation in the campaign, you can have a massive amount of magic to play with, alongside some extremely powerful laws. You also have more ranged units than any other Chaos branch, allowing you to take enemies on from a distance and pick them to pieces before they even get close to you. Now for the cons, they are severely lacking in the front lines department, with only 2 melee infantry and only one that's even remotely viable. This means you need to work extra hard to take the enemy out before they can get through your lines to prevent your army from being overrun. Your lords and heroes are all also pretty bad at actually battling, so most of the time you're going to struggle to take on enemy characters, and they become even more useless if you're in an area with low winds of magic, as you have no characters for fighting and no casting ability, so essentially no leadership. Before we get into the roster, Tzeentch has a couple of battle abilities. Like many other factions, Tzeentch has access to the 3 army abilities displayed on the right hand side of the screen. You unlock them in ascending order by filling the bar, and this is done by spending Winds of Magic in your battles. Arcane Surge increases the Winds of Magic reserves and power recharge rates, Bolt of Change deals high damage in a medium strike area, and Storm of Fire rains damage on a large area for a pretty long duration. Each ability costs a certain number of points, and using each one drains the appropriate amount of points from the bar. Arcane Surge costs 100 points, so drains 1 bar, Bolt costs 200 and drains 2, and Storm costs 300 and drains all 3. Alongside this, they of course have their own internal cooldowns, so you can't quite spam them forever. Now onto the roster, starting with the Lords, and starting with the only legendary Lord so far, Kairos Fateweaver. This guy's a spellcaster that causes terror, and as with all units in the faction, has access to the barrier. Of course, all Tzeentch lords, including Kairos, are completely reliant on their magic to do all of their damage. Looking at his stats, this is pretty obvious since he has some pretty dire melee stats, so despite his high damage and magical attacks, you'll want to keep him out of combat for the most part, as it's just not worth the risk to him for the damage he does. If you have no choice, then try to pick something with relatively low damage to ensure he doesn't take too many hits for his troubles. He of course has access to the Lore of Tzeentch, which is an extremely powerful lore with many options for high damage, alongside some pretty powerful buffs and magical thievery, allowing you to drain the enemy's magic and funnel it into yourself. As well as this, he can also pick up parts of some other lores based around which fragment you pick up from his skill tree. This does include the ever-balanced Pendulum from the Lore of Shadows, so if you want easy damage, then go for this. You want to keep him flying around the map to make the most of those spells and deal as much damage as possible with the winds that you have. If you're manipulating the winds correctly on the campaign map, you should have plenty of these, so be prepared for a lot of casts. He also has a few abilities. Great Arcane Conduit, which increases the power recharge rate, Oracle of Eternity, which grants him massive damage resistance for a short time, Gaze of Fate, which debuffs an enemy unit's melee attack and prevents movement, and Scroll of Destiny, which increases the Winds of Magic reserves. Our first non-legendary lord is the Herald of Tzeentch. These are another spellcaster and come with flaming attacks, and these can be recruited with the Lore of Tzeentch or the Lore of Metal. These lads don't have the best melee stats, though they can use ranged fire to deal some damage without getting totally involved in the front lines. I would say to keep them from the front lines, battling against anything past early game units, and keep them on the backs and sides for ranged fire and magical support. They can utilize their powerful laws of Tzeentch or Metal to rain death and destruction upon their enemies, alongside a number of powerful augments and hexes. Use them pretty similar to Kairos. Avoid direct melee conflict and utilize as much magic as possible whilst also getting some range shots in wherever you can. And they also come with an ability, Arcane Conduit, which increases the power recharge rate. They can also get on one of 2 mounts. The Disc of Tzeentch allows them to fly, which brings massive speed alongside some charge bonus all in a small package. And the Burning Chariot loses some speed but picks up some weapon strength at the cost of melee defense. If you're decent at microing, then this is the better choice, as cycle charging them can net you some pretty tasty damage. If not, then the Disc is a great choice for high speed flying in a small package that's a lot easier to maneuver. And of course, as with all Heralds of Chaos, upon reaching level 15, they can evolve into the Exalted Lords of Change. These guys are still spellcasters and now cause terror, and of course can come with either the Lore of Tzeentch or Lore of Metal. They are fast flying monsters with powerful melee stats and a decent amount of tankiness when you combine 50 defense, 30 armor, 800 barrier and 7800 HP. With their high melee stats and high damage, they are now capable of getting involved in the front lines and tearing most enemies to pieces, whether it's a clump of infantry or something larger. They of course still have their chosen lore, so can pump out spells better than most lords and deal a lot of damage whilst doing so. You want to use them to charge into combat and do some damage before pulling them out when they burn through the barrier and start to take some hits. Keep them casting as much as possible, as those spells are still their real power and you'd be a fool not to make use of them. They have no mounts, but they do have 2 abilities, Great Arcane Conduit and Prismatic Polarity, which decreases ability and spell cooldowns. Coming to the heroes now, first up we have the cultists of Tzeentch, and these are spellcasters, with the lore of fire. These guys are some pretty weak battlers, much like the other cultists aside from Khorne. They come with low melee stats, armor, and pretty low and non-armor piercing damage. They want to be used pretty much entirely as casters, as they are the only way to get a hold of the lore of fire in the faction, and we all know that that is one seriously powerful lore of magic. You want to keep them on the backlines and out of combat versus pretty much anything that has even a small amount of damage, have them drop casts on the enemy lines from a safe distance, and rack up value from afar. They also of course come with some very powerful abilities. The Gates of Tzeentch abilities allow them to summon pink horrors into battle and eventually Lords of Change in the campaign when upgraded, making them extremely high value units. They can also go on a Chaos Steed, which gives them a huge boost in speed, as well as some armor and charge bonus. This doesn't change how you want to use them, but it does allow them to move easier around the map, so it's worth picking up. Our other heroes are the Iridescent Horrors, and these are spellcasters with flaming attacks and can be recruited with the lore of Tzeentch or the lore of Metal. These are pretty much exactly the same as Heralds, but come with some slightly worse stats in HP, leadership, melee, weapon, and missile strength. You want to use them in pretty much the same way, so keep them safe at the back and use their spells and missile damage to get them value from a safe distance. They come with the same 2 mountain choices as the Lords, and the exact same advice applies again here. The disc is better for keeping them on the move and hard to hit, whereas the chariot is better if you can micro them to do some charging around alongside their powerful casting ability. Now come to the melee infantry, starting first with the blue horrors. These are a tier 1 unit and come with a ranged weapon, flaming attacks, and a weak versus armor. These lads are your early game infantry, and calling them a front lines unit is honestly a little bit generous. They come with their ranged weapons, which deal some decent damage in a short range before they engage in melee, so they can at least get a small amount of burst damage out before the lines clash. Once they do get into melee, they really don't have the best stats, with pretty low weapon damage and melee stats barely surpassing 20, meaning they are not going to hit hard and are going to feel pretty much every single hit that the enemy sends back at them. They do gain some added survivability with their meager armor and the Tzeentch barrier, but aside from that, they are likely to fall pretty quickly to almost anything without help, so support them with monsters to keep them going. Do not leave them alone versus anything with even modest amounts of damage, or they will go down and go down fast. Our other melee infantry are the Forsaken of Tzeentch. These are a tier 2 unit and are armoured and come with Frenzy. The Forsaken are a unit shared by Tzeentch and Nurgle, and over Nurgle this variant gains a 400 HP barrier, magical attacks instead of poison, 40% spell resistance, and they no longer cause fear. Other than that, you want to use them exactly the same. They come with very high armor and leadership, which makes them into the best frontline you can have as Tzeentch. Their damage output isn't too bad either, with a decent weapon damage, so anything without too much armor should go down fairly quickly, but this will drop off immediately once you get into the later mid game. Once this happens, you'll need to give them some support in the form of missiles, magic, and monsters, otherwise they're going to get shredded and run, leaving the rest of your army extremely exposed. Coming to the ranged infantry now, first up we have the Pink Horrors. These are a tier 2 unit, are a decent melee combatant, and come with flaming attacks. These guys are pretty much the blue horrors, but better in every single way but HP. They come with improvements to every other stat but speed, meaning you're better off with an army full of these lads than blue horrors if it really comes down to it. They deal a decent amount of missile damage over a relatively short range, but they do have a steep firing arc, so you can fire over the heads of your other units just fine. They are pretty hopeless in melee, so keeping them safe from being charged must be a high priority, otherwise all their ammo will go right down the drain and all their value. Keeping them behind or on the side of your lines should do just fine, as long as you choose targets carefully and avoid friendly fire where you can. And of course these guys come in another variation. The Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch are a tier 3 unit, are a decent melee combatant and come with flaming attacks. Like all other Exalted variants, these lads are basically better in every single stat, so will do more damage from a range and be slightly less pathetic in melee, but only slightly. You still want to keep them safe as much as possible, as the damage they pump out when firing is astronomically higher than that in melee. They also pick up the Arcane Mirth ability, which grants increased Winds of Magic recharge rate when out of melee combat. Use them pretty much the same, just do more damage. Now comes to the Cavalry and Chariots. First up we have the Chaos Steeds of Tzeentch. These are a tier 3 unit, are armoured and shielded, and are an anti-infantry unit. These are your standard heavy sword cav. They come with very high survivability with high HP, the barrier, high armour, and melee defense, meaning they make for a great sustained battling cav. They still have a decent charge bonus, so once they make contact they'll get a nice damage bonus, but don't feel the need to charge them in and out if it's too much micro, as they will still deal decent damage sat in combat with high melee attack and respectable weapon strength. Not really a bad way to use them, but I would say it's optimal to take out ranged units first before looping back to sandwich the enemy front lines. If you're feeling extra, you could even use these guys as your front lines infantry replacements, since they have more armor and HP and defense than Forsaken and only lose a teeny bit of weapon strength. They're a really solid cav, and if you're not great at micro, are a great option for dipping your toes into the world of horse units. Our other cav units are the Doom Knights of Tzeentch. These are a tier 3 units and are armored and shielded and are anti-infantry units. These are pretty similar to the Chaos Knights of Tzeentch, but with just a few differences. For starters, they can fly, meaning they are incredibly fast and can get over and around enemies easier than any ground-based units ever could. They also have a ton more weapon damage and a tastier charge bonus, meaning once they make contact, they are going to dish out a disgusting amount of punishment. Sadly, they do lose quite a lot of melee defense, HP, and a little bit of armor, so they aren't quite the toughest, so I would say to keep them charging around rather than sitting in combat, as they will not be able to survive if left alone. The They make for great flankers as they can easily take out backlines. Just be careful of anything with better melee stats than them, as their large hitboxes can spell rapid doom if they get pinned down and outclassed in combat. They're also pretty decent for taking out flying units, but again, just make sure it's something they can beat in one-on-one combat, otherwise they're going to start to struggle. Next up we have the only missile chariot unit, the Burning Chariot of Tzeentch. This is a tier 3 unit and comes with warp flame, flaming attacks, and is of course flying. These are units unlike pretty much anything else. They are a flying chariot with one of the craziest missile strengths we've ever seen, with 1400 and its armor piercing and warp flame. You want to choose key targets in enemy lines to rain this onto and wipe them from the face of the earth. They only come with 9 ammo though, so I would say turn off fire at will and choose what they are firing at all times. Once they are out of ammo, they have a very high weapon strength, but they don't have loads of health or armor or great melee stats, so I can't recommend letting them get involved in the front lines. The most they should be doing is some cycle charging, but just be very careful and get them out of there safely or you will regret it. If you're not great at micro, then just get them off the field or somewhere safe, as they will just crumble if left to fight anything better than very weak ranged units. Next up we have the Beasts and Monsters, starting with the Chaos Furies of Tzeentch. These are a tier 2 units and come with Vanguard deployments and are very fast. These lads are available for all the Chaos factions, and the Tzeentch variants are the same as the base unit, but just gain the barrier. Other than that, you want to use them pretty much the same as all other Furies. Use them to get into the enemy backlines and burst down ranged units as quickly as possible in 2-on-1 blitz attacks. Their barriers will allow them to stay alive through a volley, meaning you should be able to make contact relatively unscathed, meaning extra damage on the enemy, and basically no cost to you. Just be cautious of getting them pinned down by anything better than weaker ranged units, as in melee they just cannot stand up for themselves. If you're going to bring them into the front lines once ranged are taken out, then only send them in versus something you know you can take out, to make sure you avoid damage as much as possible. Next we have the Screamers of Tzeentch, and of course anti-large flying units. These guys seem like the logical upgrade to Chaos Furies with their much improved weapon damage, but aside from that, they are somehow worse in pretty much every stat. On top of this, they are shaped like kites, so are massive targets for ranged, meaning if you don't shut down enemy missiles, you're going to feel the burn and you're going to feel it very hard. They are also not even close to tough, so anything sent their way, they are going to feel it. However, if you can get them alive into the enemy backlines, they will do an excellent job taking out ranged backline units and some weak cav, but never send them into the front lines unless you absolutely have to. Their melee stats mean they will crumple like a napkin if put against anything that's putting up even a small amount of a fight. If all ranged units are taken out, then look for a front lines unit that's near to breaking and send these lads in to finish the job in a single charge. Anything more and it's not going to end well. Next up we have the Spawn of Tzeentch. These are a tier 3 unit, are damage dealers and have armor sundering attacks and are of course unbreakable. Of course each of the 4 chaos branches has their own spawn. The Tzeentch ones have the barrier, high defense and armor sundering attacks. Just like all of the others, they are hulking masses with a ton of HP, hardly any armor, and a strong weapon strength without a ton of armor piercing. Stick them in the middle of your front lines and they will fight until either they or the enemy is gone due to their unbreakable leadership. They make for great mid-game infantry blenders, as low armor infantry will melt under their massive weapon strength and rapid area attacks. Just be cautious versus anti-large or high armor, as their damage falls off a cliff and their large hitboxes make them into easy targets. Of course armor sundering helps versus armor a little bit, but you still don't want to be sending them in, as it's just going to waste a little bit of their damage. Our final monsters are the Lords of Change. These are tier 3 units and are spellcasters that cause terror. They are basically little Lord units, the only thing they are missing is the skill tree. They are large, single entities with high HP but low armor, meaning they can take a beating, but it's not wise to send them in too deep. They can fly, which makes them extremely fast, meaning they can be anywhere you need them at the drop of a hat. They also have very high melee stats and great weapon damage, meaning whatever you do send them against, they'll do some great damage whilst they are there. They can also get access to the full lore of Tzeentch through campaign research, making them into extra spellcasters to have on the field to rain fire and deafen your enemies to an excessive extent. Just keep an eye on those winds, as too many casters can burn through the winds in no time. I would say keep them on the move to do a little damage here and there, while sprinkling spells in wherever needed. Avoid melee combat versus almost anything, unless you are certain you can beat it, and beat it quickly. And finally we come to the Missile Monsters and Beasts. First of all, we have the Flamers of Tzeentch, and these are a tier 3 unit and deal armor-piercing warp flame attacks, and of course, have flaming attacks. These lads are pretty much entirely reliant on their ranged weapons, since their melee stats and survivability are just not it chief. They have hardly any armor, low HP, and horrible defense. Fortunately, the range damage more than makes up for this, with their incredible armor-piercing warp flame raining on enemies and decimating anything they come into contact with. They don't have a lot of ammo, so choose your targets carefully and make your shots count to make the most of it, as once they run out, they will be pretty useless. Don't be fooled by high weapon strength, they don't belong anywhere near melee combat if at all possible. They also come in another variation, the Exalted Flames of Tzeentch. These are another tier 3 units and still come with warp flame, armor piercing flaming attacks. from 12 entities to 1, and somehow the missile strength has risen to 1400. That's chaos for you. Again, these lads are entirely focused on the range damage with little care for anything else. You want to set them up and fire them sparingly, ensuring they have a clean shot to take out your intended target to make the most of their astronomical ranged power and very low ammo. Once they run out, I would say keep them away from melee unless you have absolutely no choice, as they have no defense, will melt like an ice cube in a sauna. These are pretty much exactly the same as the burning chariots of Tzeentch, but just not on the burning chariots. Choose your targets carefully and let them rip. And our final unit is the Soul Grinder of Tzeentch. This guy's a tier 3 unit and deals armor piercing damage and causes terror. These are another unit that all the Chaos branches have access to, and they are most similar to the Nurgle variant. These lads have less ammo and range than the Nurgle grinders, but a ton more damage per shot, alongside a bonus versus large, making them great for sniping single entities in the enemy lines. They are still excellent front lines battlers with high armor, HP, and the barrier, making them extremely tanky despite their low melee defense. They do great damage with high melee attack, magical and armor piercing damage, meaning nothing can stop their damage from going straight to the HP pool. Honestly, there isn't much they can't do, so have them focus fire on some key enemy targets, and then get them sent into the front lines to rip and tear. Now we come to the army compositions, and in Warhammer 3, every unit has a tier from 1 to 3, and I'm going to use these tiers to make you some armies for the early, mid and late game, so that you are set for every single step of your campaign. First of all, we come to tier 1. For this, we're going to lead with a Herald of Tzeentch with the Lore of Tzeentch. Of course, these types of lords are the only choice, and we're of course going to go for the Lore of Tzeentch, since we're playing as them, and it's a top tier damaging lore. Now, the rest of the army is going to be 19 Blue Horrors. I mean, they are the only tier 1 unit, and they really aren't the best, but en masse, they will deal plenty of range damage and be able to take most early game armies down fairly quickly, as long as you choose your targets correctly. This army has that spell value right out of the gate, and you're going to want to make full use of it to carry your battles, which will carry on right up until the late game. Sadly, that lord won't be doing much else aside from this, since their melee stats are pretty poor, and they need line of sight to use their ranged. Just be sure to keep them at the back and safe from any enemy duelists. Blue Horrors will be pretty naff versus pretty much everything early on. In melee combat, their range damage will be their only value, so make sure to focus and take down units as quickly as possible. Just make the most of all that ammo before sending them into melee, and you should be just fine. Coming to tier 2 now, still going to be led by that Herald of Tzeentch. Should have your full spellbook online by now, alongside a mount of your choice, so have a speedy, powerful caster on the field. We're also going to pick up a Cultist of Tzeentch here. These lads will be a great additional spellcaster with that wonderful Lore of Fire. When you combine this with their summon abilities, they have a ton of value in a very small package, as long as you keep them safe. For the front lines, we're going to go with 6 Forsaken of Tzeentch. These are a much tougher front lines infantry that's going to hold back most early game infantry and give other units plenty of time to do some damage. They will also do some decent damage of their own till enemies get more armor online, so they're a really great option for that early to mid game. For ranged, we're going to go with 6 Pink Horrors of Tzeentch. Got some nice range to do the majority of your army's damage, as long as you keep them safe. And finally, we're going to go with 6 Screamers of Tzeentch. We have some decent flankers here that will obliterate enemy backlines. Just be careful of them getting caught out by any actual fighting units. Now, this army has a ton of magical power online, so you'll be able to carry your battles with your casters and rack up a ton of damage and kills with 2 very powerful lords. You also have a decently tough and high damage front line for this stage of the game. When you combine this with the ranged units, you should be rolling most enemy front lines with ease, as long as you don't get too hard countered by any cav. Finally, those Screamers will be making short work of enemy backlines, and will be able to swoop in to get the final breaking on enemy front lines if needed. And finally, coming to tier 3, we're now going to be led by an Exalted Lord of Change of Tzeentch. Of course, going for the evolution to get these extremely powerful lords. They still come with great magical power, but are now flying by default, as well as being pretty decent fighters, so they really can do it all. Keeping that Cultist of Tzeentch, who should have all their spells and abilities online, as well as their mounts, mean these guys should be fast-moving casters with some great summons to turn the tide in your favour. We're going to keep the 6 Forsaken of Tzeentch, since we don't really unlock anything better unless you want to use Chaos Knights, but they are extremely expensive and a little bit more micro-intensive. For the range, going to go with 2 Exalted Pink Horrors of Tzeentch, 2 Flamers, and 2 Burning Chariots. Now we have ranged units for pretty much any scenario. The Horrors will be great for pretty much everything, as their spread projectiles can focus fire key targets or do damage in an area. The Flamers will be great for melting any clumps in the game, and the Chariots will be great for focus damage to take out key single targets with their ridiculous missile strength. We're going to go with 2 Lords of Change. You're going to want to invest in the research to unlock all their spells and wipe the enemy as quickly as possible with your overwhelming magical power. They're also great versus enemy flyers or weak infantry, as long as they don't have too much damage coming their way. We're going to go with 2 Discs of Tzeentch. These are a great speedy flying cav that will roll straight over enemy backlines, and that's exactly what they want to do. Wipe out the backlines before coming back to cycle charge anything that's left. And finally, we're going to close out with 2 Soul Grinders of Tzeentch. These do great large target damage from a range before being sent in to do some great frontlines slaughtering. Now in this army, you have a ton of magical power to drop on enemies and burst them down with just a couple of casts at the start of your battles. If you use this correctly, you want to be wiping out the majority of enemies in that first engagement, and then picking up scraps for the rest of these battles. You also have great ranged power to take on any opponent, and you have some brilliant flyers to counter enemy flying units and get around to vulnerable units in the back. Now this may be a lot of unit types, but you have something for any enemy to take them out with ease. And that is everything you need to know about Tzeentch in battle. If you enjoyed this video, then consider leaving it a like, and of course subscribe to see more videos like this, including the Warhammer 3 faction ranking coming on Monday. I'd like to take this it's time to thank some supporters of the channel, like Dominic Schmass and Adam T, and of course Henry Tucker for their support at the Unclean Ones tier. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member here on YouTube, a subscriber on Twitch, or a patron on Patreon. Doing so gets you shoutouts at the end of videos, just like all of these wonderful people. Huge thanks to all supporters, one final thank you for watching, and for now, I've been COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I will see you next turn.